I was.
We can hear it again. It's a good one.
And you could have told the Iowa hotel story.
I was figuring you would bring that up.
But for another day. So my name is...
That's a story about me.
Yeah, it's funny. My name is Lawrence Spivak, and I go by the nickname the Free Market Warrior because I travel the country speaking to conservative groups like yours about issues relating to free market economics. And it's always nice to be back in New England. I don't do a lot in New England, even though I technically speaking live in New England, but there's not a whole lot of, it's hardly the center of the conservative movement, so I only come here periodically. And I was going to talk tonight about democracy, which isn't exactly an economic issue, but it'll work its way around to it anyhow. And what I was remembering was that my history teacher in high school told us that our founding fathers were against democracy. And this was explained to us as this kind of bizarre, idiosyncratic fact of history, like George Washington's wooden teeth.
Right.
Isn't it interesting? What a curiosity that our founding fathers thought that democracy was a bad idea. And by the time I was in college, the professors were a little bit more sophisticated. I seem to remember my professors suggesting that that the definition of the word had changed over the years. That in the time of our founding fathers, the concept of democracy was more associated with mob rule, than it is today. And so the word means something different to us. And I wondered, what is the difference between democracy and mob rule? And as far as I can tell, if the mob is on your side, it's democracy. And if the mob is on the other side, then it's mob rule. If there's another difference beyond that, I don't know what it is. And I've actually wrestled with this issue for many years, in fact decades, and I finally came to the conclusion that our founding fathers were right, we are wrong, and democracy, in fact, stinks. Democracy is kind of an interesting topic for an election year, but there we go. Democracy is a bad idea. It does not work. It does not deliver what it promises, and it delivers lots of bad stuff and very, very little good stuff, and we ought to get away from it as fast as we can. Now, let's begin at the beginning, or at least what could pass at the beginning. I don't know if any of you remember the Atlantic Charter, but at the beginning of World War II, President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill got onto a boat off the coast of Canada, and they sat down and decided to write down the Atlantic Charter, which was a document espousing our united war aims. If we're going to go fight World War II, what's the point? What are we fighting for? What's this about? What's our goal? And it was a whole list of things, and one of them was, it says, the right of all people to choose the government under which they live. And I read that, and I said, oh my gosh, they failed. They lost. Apparently, they didn't know they lost the war, because they did not achieve their goal, and I know they did not achieve the goal because I do not have the right to live to choose the government under which I live. I know it because I would not have chosen this one. So I apparently do not have that right. And then I read it again, and I realized that Churchill and Roosevelt had kind of misspoken. It's like a problem in their syntax. They're very articulate people, but they didn't quite get it right. What they meant to say is that all people should have the right to choose the government under which they live if they're in the majority. And if you're not in the majority, you have a right to nothing. You guys are all involved with politics. If you win 49% of the vote, what do you get? Nothing. Nothing, nothing, nothing. You might as well have not bothered to run. Is that not so? Okay, I'll ask our political consultant over here. If you could look at your crystal ball, and you would see that this upcoming election, you're going to get 49% of the vote, and the other guy is going to get 51% of the vote. If you knew that was what the outcome would be, you might as well just stay in bed. I mean, why even bother? Well, 49% is worth nothing. And my question is, why is that fair? What do majorities historically do? They beat up minorities. This has been happening since the beginning of time. Majorities get together and beat up minorities. Why do we need a political system to aid majorities in beating up minorities? You know, and I remember when the first times I was in Boston was a number of years ago. I did a debate with this socialist group at Boston University. I don't know if any of you guys were in on that, but I was invited to do this. It was a very socialist group, and we had a debate about the relative merits of socialism versus capitalism, and they were presenting their proposal that everything, you know, that how big your business should be allowed to go and what you should be allowed to do should all be, should all be constrained. And I said, who's going to make this decision? Who's going to decide your business can be this big, but it can't be that big? And they said the majority will have a vote. And I said, well, majorities beat up minorities. That's what they do. What they've always done. And the guy said, I remember this. He said, we'll make laws to protect minorities. And I said, who's going to make these laws? The majority. There we go. I'm glad to see we've worked all this one out. Okay? And by the way, I suspect that the word minority meant something different to me than it meant to them. Yes. I think to them the word minority means black, Hispanic, gay, transsexual, whereas to me the word minority means anyone who's got less than 50%. Okay? Republicans are a minority. Rich people are a minority. Okay, so it's a definition that applies to almost everybody in the world on some issue. You know, how are you going to meet anyone who's in the majority on everything? So that's the first problem with democracy. We're supposed to assume that somehow it's fair that you got one more than the other group. You get all the power and they get no power. But it's worse than that. We've barely scratched the surface of what's wrong with democracy. Okay? Because the idea is that we're supposed to have this power to influence what happens. And I'm a pretty political guy. I'm pretty up on what the issues are. There is hardly an issue you could put to me where I would not be able to tell you what my position is. That I would rather we do this and not do that. I've got an opinion on virtually anything. I go into the voting booth. None of my policy ideas are there. I have looked around the voting booth very, very carefully. None of my ideas are anywhere to be found in that booth. Instead, what I find is a couple of names. Names of people that I probably sometimes agree with and sometimes don't agree with. I don't think in my entire life I've ever gone into the voting booth and seen a name of somebody and said, that guy I've agreed with on everything. I mean, that's it. He's my guy. I can't imagine ever disagreeing with him. I don't think it's ever happened to me once. And in fact, as these people run for office, they generally speaking don't even tell you what they're going to do because they hire consultants, something personal. They hire consultants.
They don't hire me. I'm
okay. They hire consultants who tell them not to say what they're going to do. Okay? So they win by not telling you, and I'm supposed to guess what they're going to do, and then you get into these weird secondary events.
Sarah the Hillary?
You may recall, I guess Hillary is what?
Actually, there's a soccer thing in between us.
Oh, the Hillary of the soccer one.